Liza Wemakor is a writer and a PhD student at UC Riverside's English department. She writes and studies speculative fiction and Black American literature. Her fiction is published and/or forthcoming in Strange Horizons, Anathema Magazine, Baffling Magazine, Prismatica Magazine, and elsewhere. Her debut novel, Loving Sephoa, was published in February 2024. Liza, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Yep, so I will be reading also a flashback from Loving Sephoa, the novella that's on the screen to the left. So this is about halfway through the novella. It's chapter 5 of, I think, chapter 7. And we see Sephoa, who is the initial vampire character, escaping from a, let's say, difficult situation. Right. August 1803, Accra, West Africa. Sephoa. The medicine woman's house was exactly where Kwame said it would be, but I wouldn't have seen it if I wasn't looking for it, obscured as it is by brush and tree trunks. I tore the hem of my, Lisa's, dress on the spindly brush as I strode to her door. I knocked, waited a minute, and knocked louder, looking over my shoulder to ensure I hadn't been followed. I held my ear to the tanned wooden door, listening for the susurrus of feet. When there was no sound, I sat in a shrouded corner near her door, clinging to this safe space until she answered. I rested my head against my knees to pass the time and ended up losing track of it. A stick poking me in my side brought me back to reality, and daylight had fully set in. Thinking it might be a snake, I jumped up, but found myself facing a finely wrinkled woman in a kente-wrapped dress, holding a woven basket. Her hair was cut low to her scalp, and there were stretched holes in her earlobes where jewels would normally be. Her eyes were so deep set that they cast shadows on the perimeters of her sockets. So they've brought me another one, she said in a rough drawl, sizing me up. She lifted my chin with her thumb and peered into my eyes, the depth of her gaze unsettling me. But I see you've already had a drink, she observed with a hint of amusement. That will make our first days together easier. She kicked open her door, set her basket on the floor, and looked back at me expectantly. Do you want the white man to find you? She asked. Without another word, I followed her inside. September 1803. My work with Mami Hunu resembled my duties with the rose, and at first I resented her for it. Sweeping, cooking, gardening, fetching dried herbs and animal remains for her apothecary. For my suffering, I thought I deserved work of greater dignity. Mami was quick to remind me of my fortune in being alive, and the service she was providing by helping me to survive as a baby vampire. Grimacing at the end of her remarks, she snipped, Me am someone too. If you ever have a newborn charge, you'll see it's no gameo. She looked me up and down as she kissed her teeth, and I bowed my head in shame. I didn't complain to her ever again. I didn't like this feeling of being sour, of having nothing to look forward to, that had overtaken me since I lived with the rose. The ill feelings went nowhere, and certainly did nothing for my newborn restlessness. Edward held girls against their will, and my own first drink had been stolen from Lisa, after all. I imagined a long, troubling life of cornering victims in hospitals, bathrooms, and alleyways, apologizing as I took blood that would never be given to me willingly. I waited too long to drink, afraid of my own tongue, afraid that I wouldn't be able to control myself, that I would leave people scarred and depleted. I still believed vampires could only exist by force. Mami Hunu, who I began to call Manu, introduced me to her blood donors a few days into my stay with her, when I was wilting from hunger. Amma Green, the first donor I drank from, relieved my fears of inheriting Edward's brute force, but still made me fearful of the influence I had over people. She came to our cabin and smiled at me, lifting the back of her shea-buttered hand to my lips. I took her blood gently, and she was pleased by my tongue, for which Ma teased me mercilessly. But I wasn't prepared for how Amma and other donors would respond to my serum. The enrapturement on Amma's face was bold and bright whenever I drew from the basilic vein on her wrist. She was reluctant for me to stop, as if she would have allowed me to suck her dry in exchange for the euphoria. She began showing up to the house unannounced, and Ma and I had to chase her away for her own good. I didn't need that much blood, and I didn't want to take the risk of turning her. Even if she wanted to be turned, it was too dangerous. Her thirst for blood could be as unhinged as her thirst for serum. When Amma Green abruptly stopped showing up at our cabin, at first Ma and I were relieved that we wouldn't have to shoo her away anymore, but we were also concerned she'd gotten herself into trouble. We eventually heard that she disappeared with a Malian vampire near Bamako, becoming a blood wife that he shared with his friends. In the end, I had to admire the way she used her doe-eyed prettiness to her advantage, becoming more than a fisherman's daughter. I wish we had known she was predisposed, Ma said with a small pout, but we did not know, and so we carry on. Ma and I spoke of Amma Green less and less, then seldom. Feeding on donors frightened me after witnessing Amma's madness, but in her persistent, fearsome way, Manu convinced me that my other feeding experiences wouldn't be so bad. Various donors remarked upon the pleasure my mouth provided, but they were not hooked. Addiction was a small risk when it came to my feeding, not a guarantee. At some point, I had become an apprentice for the second time in my life, assisting Mommy as I learned to navigate being a vampire. Manu had generations of knowledge about which fauna and flora yielded which results, their effectiveness tested on her body. She liked to chew tart tree gums after meals, working them in her mouth like a grist mill. After I noticed she had most of her teeth despite her extensive tenure on Earth, each tooth white as coconut flesh, I paid more attention to how she maintained herself. The mushy face mask she made from fresh fruit despite the flies she attracted, the perfume distilled from cured mint and ginger, the oily salves that shined on her earthy skin and springy hair. Within a few months, the exhausted hair on my own head, broken from years of stress and malnutrition, was strong enough to spread past my neck. Later, in the coming decades, my kinky bedtime twist would rest at the dip of my back. People would eventually ask me how I had such thick hair, and I would tell a half lie, that it hadn't been cut since I was born. They didn't need to know which birth I had in mind. We lived simply and focused on what was within our control, the garden that needed weeding, the meat we haggled over at the market. Rabid customers, black, brown, and white, swore Mommy put liquid gold in her health and beauty tinctures. I, too, became known for the designs I pressed into people's skin with heated needles and ink, referencing charcoal sketches as I worked in those early days. I practiced first on goat hide and then on myself, stipling Yaba's name into my bicep and coating it with Ma's healing gel, derived from aloe vera and an assortment of herbs. Okay. So that's the end of my passage that I'm reading. I'll also be doing a giveaway of a physical book if the winner is in the US, or an ebook if you live abroad, just for simplicity's sake. Thank you all for listening.